Hi everyone, I'm Mindy Johnson and welcome to Primary Sources again. If it's Tuesday, here we are. And I'm so excited for our guest today. And to get us underway, I wanted to bring in a little bit of a different topic. Our subject is a little different in terms of where we are with story. And so while I get this set up, bear with me, there we are. So when we think, while we're gathering here, when we think in terms of our world, it's a colorful, vibrant, teeming place, no matter where you go, in terms of identities and stories and experiences and the evolution of how and where we got to where we are as societies and cultures around the globe. And it's filled with so many individuals and their own individual sense of how we got to where we are, how their stories evolved. And as individuals, we tend to, in our busy day-to-day world, we tend to forget that there is an individual story within each of us, regardless of where we're from and how our worlds have shaped us. Culture is a big part of that. And I love this definition here, the quality in a person or society that arises for what is regarded as excellence in arts, letters, manners, scholarly pursuits, and development or improvement of the mind. I think it's important, we use this term so much, it's important to sort of take a step back and look at what it is that defines culture, that creates and forms culture. And at the forefront of that is the arts. It's a big part of how we grow forward as a society, as a unified world in many ways. Storytelling is a long-standing tradition, traditionally a vocal tradition, but it is part of how we share who we are. We can look at the definition of story, narratives, tales, branches of literature, prose, verse, poems, drama. But in many ways, too, it is a big part of how we move our cultures forward. Through music, dance, story, and every other art form is how we tell the tales of where we came from and where we're headed. It's a tradition, an oral tradition, part of every culture. And we find common themes in each of these stories, which is, again, when we study that, that's part of what unifies us. As diverse as our cultures can be, it is part of what unifies us. And we can take those stories that we have at hand and put them in, utilize them in no matter what medium we work with as artists to shape, to define, to help to build and create those stories. Again, whether it's tactile arts or technology, we can take those stories, formulate them, and weave magic. Not only sharing our own experiences, but exploring beyond our worlds and our cultures into finding stories that can reach others in this universal way. And with the technology we have today, we can do it at even faster rates and speeds and come together as cultures as never before. It's part of what keeps us human, makes us human, and unifies us in a global culture today. And our guest today has had a strong hand, has been at the forefront of the technology and the narrative in terms of storytelling that is bringing us closer together as a culture. The wide range of films, she's been there from the very beginning of the new advent of computer-generated imagery in being able to tell our stories. And she's at a point now where the films and stories she chooses are maybe not quite mainstream, but are stories that are so important to moving our culture forward. And it is my great joy and pleasure to welcome today to Primary Sources Jinko Gotoh. Jinko, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to get to you, the live person. There she is. Jinko, hello. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Mindy, and thank you, Tina and CTN for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. It is a real joy. Now, when you began your career, the work you've been doing, and we're going to sort of build to that a little bit, but when you began your career, you were originally from Japan, yes?
Yes.
As a young girl. How has that, your origins, your earliest origins, played a role in where you are today?
Well, I was 8 when I came to this country, and my first film I saw was Lady and the Tramp as a child in Japan. And my father had already immigrated to the US, and we had not. So for me, Lady and the Tramp depicted America, as well as, for me, it was this world of dogs and animation. It was the first film I saw. I'd never seen an animated movie in my life.
Really?
I loved dogs as a child. I still love dogs. And so to me, this was like a very iconic image of what America represented, as well as for me, a big influence of why I want to be in animation.
So this is pretty transformative, just kind of a perfect storm of all things that spoke to you as a child at that time?
Yes.
Your father had quite a bit of was a strong presence in your life too, correct?
Yes, and he lives with me now. He's 95 years old, and he really, I think, unlike the traditional Japanese model, my dad was very, very pushing both my sister and I to have professions and careers. And he, wanted one of us to be a doctor and the other one to be a lawyer. I didn't end up being a doctor, but my sister did end up being a lawyer. But I think, he really empowered us and didn't differentiate us because we were girls. And when we came to this country, my sister and I didn't speak a word of English, but my father was very persistent that we would start, in 3rd grade for me and 2nd grade for my sister. And we went to this private school in Pasadena, and the principal said, well, they don't speak any English. We're going to put them into grade 1. And my father said, well, but look at her talent, her other talents. And so we were given a math test. And, in Japan, we learn how to do division by the time we're in 3rd grade. Here, we're learning how to multiply. So that was one of the tricks my dad used. And at the time, I also played piano growing up. So he said she also has music skills. So played the piano, and the school said, okay, she can be in 3rd grade.
So mathematics took on a strong place for you as a young child, and also with your father's work. You also met someone, I think, at a very early age that had impact on you as well. And I'm going to jump back to sharing my screen again. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Astro Boy, my father had met someone that knew him. And so when he came back, he would come back to Japan like once a year after he had started coming to the US. And I recall, it was the same year I'd seen Lady and the Tramp. My father said, we're going to take you and my sister, and I have an older cousin, and the 3 of us and my mom and my dad went to go visit Osamu Tezuka's studio. His studio was like on the 2nd floor of this little building that he had, and downstairs was his medical practice. And we went up to the studio, and there he was making Astro Boy. And I was blown away. I was completely blown away. he gave us background paintings and cells. And I still remember to this day. Now, if you ask my sister or my cousin, they don't. But I remember leaving his studio and said to my dad, I want to do this when I grow up. And my dad said, well, remember, he became a medical doctor before he became an animator.
That's a good parent. Looking out for you.
Yeah.
He is considered sort of the Walt Disney of manga, and sort of the godfather of anime today.
Yes.
And that's got to be a magical. I could see where that would have lasting impact.
It did. And then I saw him again, I think it was in the early 80s. And I went to a book signing in Japan, and I met him, and I went and spoke with him, and he was so gracious because he pretended he remembered me. Of course, there's no way he could have remembered me, but it was very gracious. And just such a pleasure to be able to see him again, because he has such a big influence for me as a child.
And what a great legacy, what a great, the impact of that, and where you now are sort of carrying that tradition on in so many ways, with these transformative stories that you tell. And who knows how many visitors that you've met with where you've held the same impact on. I just think that's pretty profound. So bravo on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so you moved on to a very kind of pioneering career in mathematics and early digital. You were right at the cusp of the digital horizon. You were doing now this is, I know, not quite the setup that you would have been working on, but similar to it when you talk about an Oxbury, just so for folks to get a sense of what might be involved. Can you talk a little bit about your origins of getting into digital technology?
Right. So unlike most animators or people in animation, I don't draw. But I was really good at math. And as my dad said, okay, you have to have a real profession. You can't, do this animation thing. So I ended up going to engineering school and became an applied math major. And I stumbled into this computer graphics class. It was a civil engineering class, and it was called Introduction to Computer Graphics. So I took the course, and I was like, oh my God, here's my answer. Long awaited answer to animation. And took the course and went to the professor and said, who else is doing this work? And he said, there's a professor up at the medical school. His name is Dr. Lou Katz. He said, he's one of the pioneers. And so I called him up and I said, Professor Katz, I would really like to do this. And he said, well, I'm actually looking for a programmer. And he said, I'm looking for a C programmer. I said, I program in C. And he said, well, come on up. So I was very grateful. He gave me my first job coming out of college. And so I programmed for him, and he was doing the research of interaction of carcinogen and DNA. And he basically had a Textronic green screen monitor, and I wrote code, and there was a camera that was attached, and every night we'd go away. I'd turn on the camera and we'd shoot a frame at a time. So then after, Professor Katz was going like, you should go to grad school. Since you're working at the medical school, you'll get free tuition. And so I didn't want to go back to engineering school. And so I thought, well, I should just apply to film school. If I can get in, here's a way. So luckily I got accepted. And I remember one of the classrooms, Chuck Jones had been at the school and did a whole Roadrunner thing on the wall. And I was like, this is great. But no one at that time at the film school was doing animation, but someone had donated this film school to Oxbury. So basically, nobody else wanted to do it. So I pretty much, spent days and weeks experimenting, shooting things with Oxbury.
So it really was sort of your entr'acte into
Yes.
actual animation and right at the forefront. It is astounding to me how everything, all points converged for you in all your talents, all your areas, and then the timing of the technology being applied to animation. Now, you were working you were working with Toshiba, yes, at the expo, is that right?
It was for the Hitachi Pavilion. So what happened was, after I got out of film school, I did a documentary film that kind of made the film festival circuit. And my father, again, being a very strong parent and wanting to, see his daughter succeed, took upon himself to get me some press coverage in Japan. And so I got to talk about my computer graphics work, and I got to talk about my docu. And so I got recruited by Dentsu, which is a big ad agency in Japan. And at the time, they were preparing for the Tsukuba Expo, which took place in 1985. Wow. And if you look back in the 80s, the Japanese tech companies really wanted to be, pushing their technology to be world-class. So the ad agency had discovered the notion of computer graphics, and so their whole campaign was, okay, let's get our big Japanese sponsors, the tech sponsors, to commission computer graphics and large format films. So Hitachi actually ended up sponsoring a film that we did it over at Digital Production in LA. And that was, John Whitney Jr. and Gary Demas's company. And they were actually running the Cray computers, which were the supercomputers back then. Of course, Hitachi didn't have supercomputers back then, but it didn't matter. So I got to be an agency producer and oversaw the making of the Hitachi Pavilion film for Expo 85. So it was great because, I got to work with some of the very best in the industry and met a lot of people that became colleagues and friends and so forth over the last, I guess now, we're going into, 35 years.
Yeah. Well, and 85 was a big year because it was around that time that another film came out that had a large impact on you as well.
Yes. So after, finishing the Expo 85, I went on to set up a small commercial house, and I was in New York City shooting actually a big commercial for Sanyo with Bon Jovi, and Roger Rabbit came out, and I remember going to the theater watching this, and I thought, oh my God, there's got to be a way. I've got to get into feature animation. And this film had the same kind of impact that Lady Tramp had for me.
Wow. It's interesting because this really wasn't a computer. There was technology involved, but not computer. People don't realize that this was
right.
Chiseled in stone, or traditionally done in many ways.
And you have to remember, by this point, I think, computer graphics, I think the holy grail for computer graphics became photoreal. And for me, computer graphics was, for me, creating worlds and creating characters that didn't exist, and it wasn't about photoreal. So, I always went back to the traditional animation of creating characters, creating worlds, and using technology to push the medium. And for me, photoreal wasn't what I was looking for. So to me, Roger Rabbit signified the fact that animation as a medium was coming back in a different way.
Yeah. Well, and it was a transformative film, just getting animation back into the forefront of film and getting audiences into the theaters
Mm-hmm.
with animation. So it was very pivotal, and I thought that was so exciting about your path, that film would have such impact on you as well and kind of get you back on track. So and one of the many pluses, the many mounting pluses that have come from that film is getting you on track to come
Yes.
to the industry. You then continued on, and so you had been in New York working in commercials and other areas. What brought you out to LA then?
Oh, so I was just shooting in that summer.
Okay.
Yeah. So so after I got out of film school, I came back to LA and worked in LA, and doing commercials. I travel around the globe shooting commercials, but yeah, I was still based in LA after I come back from school.
And then how did you make that first step into feature length animation?
So what was interesting was, because I gotten to know all the houses here through my work at the agency and then doing commercials, I knew, Bob. I knew Bob Abel. I knew Omnibus. I knew all the rhythm and cues, etc. All the facilities. And one of my best friends was a rep, and so they had gotten a big job. And she called me in a panic, and she said, "We just got this big job, but everyone just left, including the producer." And so she said, "Do you want to come and produce this?" And I said, "Well, maybe." At the time I was working on a Coca-Cola campaign, and I said, "Yeah." I said, I think I want to do this." So that actually got me in the door and worked on the Mortal Kombat video series. And then next thing I heard, Space Jam was happening, and a lot of the people that had worked on Space Jam had worked on Roger Rabbit. So I was like, okay, I've got to figure out how to get this job. And luckily, they were looking for a CG producer at Cinesite. And I got the gig, and then spent the next year and a half making Space Jam, which was exciting because for me, to be able to work with some of the best talent in traditional animation and people in visual effects that have brought together Roger Rabbit. But rather than doing things traditionally, there was this new digital technology.
So with that, though, this advent of technology, what kinds of things were you advancing at that point with the integration of technology?
So this was the first time where we were actually building a CG set that included, live action and animation. So we built the pipeline basically. And the way it worked was, it kind of worked backwards because they had gone and shot Michael Jordan on a green screen stage. And then we had to build a CG stadium. And then we have to figure out a way to create basically backgrounds that would become, backgrounds and layout for the traditional animators to animate all the 2D characters. So it was a pretty daunting task. No one knew how to quite do this, and we were kind of making this up as we were going along. And then we have to figure out, okay, once you draw and get them painted, now we got to get this all composited,
So this would have been, and it's interesting. This is a film that we don't necessarily think of as being such an advanced, a step in the advancement of our storytelling. It's fun, it's light, it's basketball, it is that blend of live action and animation again, but it is a hybrid beyond where Roger Rabbit broke through, and few people realize the technological advancements that it was really a first for blending the worlds.
And again, for me, it's when you're blending worlds and making new worlds, there's a magical quality to it. I mean, there are scenes in this movie that are horrific because the animation wasn't done right, and we had all kinds of problems. I remember sitting in dailies going, "What happened? Why aren't these characters on model? What happened to the scale? And there are moments where I was sitting there going like, oh my God, it can't be this bad. How do we fix this,
How did this integration of digital technology at that point, now we take it for granted, but what kind of steps did you have to take? How did it change the pipeline in a way from traditional to the advent of digital?
Well, so every element came into basically the compositing tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rather than, even though everything was done in a linear process, everything ended up in compositing at the end of the day. So that was interesting from that perspective. But I think the biggest challenge that we had was, how do we find these artists? No one's actually been doing this, right? And so since that was great because they came up with a program where they can train the artist, where it started from basically where they had to learn the basic tools of doing rotos, doing motion tracking. And so it was almost like an educational program as we recruited the best artists. They were taught the tools to learn the processes. And so by the time we got into compositing at the end of the movie, these artists had been trained through every step along the way. And some of the best compositors today and some of the best VFX supervisors, compositing supervisors, they came out of that movie. So for me, it's exciting to see how, we developed the process and how the artists learned and, mastered these tools. But, they all started with a very strong foundation, being really strong artists. And
so, we take it for granted today, and it's not all that long ago that there was this transition. And at the time, I know a number of artists were vehemently against it. But now it's standard, and
mm-hmm.
It's exciting that I think it's an important moment to look back at and examine how the steps that were in place and the transitions that had to unfold to get us to where we are. So from this film, then, you made your way to kind of fulfilling a bit of a dream, getting to work at a place that you had long wanted to get to. That you found your way to Disney Animation. Talk a little bit about that time period and what was happening at the studio, that what you brought to the feast of animation at the studio.
Yeah, so what was exciting was that, Disney had been doing these, had revitalized animation and had been doing these wonderful, wonderful 2D animated movies, and they were starting to incorporate some CG into it. But by the time I was finishing up Space Jam, Disney was also building the digital studio that would become a home to Dinosaur. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because Dinosaur originally started as a stop motion film. They wanted to do this in stop motion. And so they had hired amazing stop motion animators and craftspeople to the studio. And then the studio decided they wanted to do this as a CG film. So again, it was an interesting challenge, and a much, much larger scale than Space Jam, is that we had to build a digital studio and then also train all these wonderful animators and craftspeople that had come from stop motion and give them the digital tools mm-hmm. to be able to animate and make this great movie.
And it's in going back to look at it, and it's a film, sadly, that is overlooked. it is such an incredible blend of real world, literally, the epic scale of and scope of locations that are from the real world, blended with CG characters, which were cutting edge at the time,
Mm-hmm.
bleeding edge. My gosh, what kind of challenges did that present for you?
Well, it was a lot of challenges because, you know, there was no pipeline at that point, CG pipeline. We built every tool from our furring system, how we fur lemurs, to our skin and muscle system for our dinosaurs. We built a crowd tool. It was the first crowd simulation tool. Then we had all the software packages that, you know, each package did something good. But then, you know, these packages all had to talk to each other. So I had a great team of software developers on the show. And then the studio also had a lot of software developers and engineers building the pipeline in other ways and writing tools. And so it was really art and technology coming together, much like what Walt Disney had done, you know, decades ago.
Yeah.
But this was such a large scale where, you know, we had such a huge team, and it was exciting. We were, you know, bringing the best talent from visual effects, best talent from stop motion. We had traditional animators also learning the tools, and it was a technological challenge, and it was true innovation where I think, you know, we set the standards of what we can do in CG. I mean, obviously Pixar had been already doing Toy Story and their films, but again, this was, you know, pushing the creative envelope in a different way.
And it's such an, as you said, the massive advancements needed to accomplish this really propelled the art form forward in ways that I think, you know, at the time this film came out, sadly, that technology story was not told as perhaps as widely as it could have, I think. And it's a film that is overlooked for where it moved us forward to. So, and again, that's all leading back to you and being at the forefront of making these transitions. Unfortunately, I don't think it did very well in the box office. But
No, and I think this is where I think, you know, as great as, you know, you can innovate technology art wise, if you don't have an emotional story,
yeah,
that people resonate to, you can have the most beautiful images, but people are not going to remember. And I remember, you know, everyone worked really hard to try and make this to be a compelling emotional story, but it was really hard.
yeah,
Very hard. And I don't think, you know, we reached that with the story. And that's why I think this movie gets forgotten.
yeah. Teachable moment, but I think something definitely worth revisiting for many reasons. And then also your work on Fantasia 2000. Um, Again, a blend of beautiful hand rendered work, but also the digital revolution at the time and what was accomplished.
Yeah, I'm especially proud of Fantasia 2000, especially the fire bird sequence. I got to know the Brizzi brothers, Gaetan and Paul Brizzi, and you know, obviously they're very, very talented animators that came from France, and they, you know, technology was the farthest thing for them.
Yeah.
But they had inspiration on what they wanted the film to look like. So that was exciting for us because we got to write tools and develop a look that was very unlike Dinosaur, and to be able to visually innovate by pushing that creative envelope. So that was really exciting.
A great example of technology serving the visual and serving story is, I think, all throughout this film. Each of these segments just, And what was it like working with Roy?
I did not have much contact with Roy
Ah,
because I was managing the digital production process, and so I was on the technical side, and not so much on the storytelling side.
got it. Well, one of the champions, I think, of advancing technology and artistry, and few people realize he really was the force behind the funding and support.
Totally.
And
Yeah, without Roy's commitment, this movie would never have happened.
yeah.
Because this was in a long, long time making, and it was a very expensive endeavor for Disney.
Yeah.
And without Roy's support, I don't think Fantasia 2000 would have ever come to fruition.
Yeah. And he didn't shy away. It wasn't he embraced technology just as well.
Totally.
And was very supportive of where it could push the art form.
And I think that comes down to, the whole tradition of where Walt had started, right?
Yes.
For every film he did, he was innovating the visual storytelling.
Absolutely.
And so I think Roy, continued to push that envelope at Feature Animation at Disney and really push the boundaries and allowed, us to do these films. Because without that, I think we could have easily got stuck in one look and one form of the medium.
Yeah. Well, and you said something here that I think is a real common theme throughout your body of work is this spirit of innovation. Everything you've done has some new kind of pushing the boundaries in a way, which is exciting. And that was part of what brought you up to this studio.
Yeah, so I was really excited when Pixar invited me to come up and visit, and they shared with me all the films that they were making. And I watched Finding Nemo and fell in love with it. And first of all, the story is a beautiful story, and to be part of that team could be more exciting than I had, ever imagined. And so
technological challenges on this film, my gosh, just getting the look. Again, we take it for granted today, but at the time, you were breaking barriers. You were innovating and pushing boundaries in terms of being able to tell stories under the sea through technology. Pretty amazing.
It was pretty. This was probably one of the challenges that doing Hitachi Expo 85 and seeing that a single frame could take 24 hours, 30 hours to render, and then 15 years later, these water frames were taking I think it was like 16 hours a frame to render water.
Oh my word.
And we're like going, there is no way we can make this movie. This is how long it's going to take us. So we said, okay, by tax day, this was in 2002, by tax day, we got to figure out how to get this water computation down. And we were still back then at Pixar rendering everything in a single layer. So it's a lot of computation, but we had some really amazing engineers and developers, and came tax day, we got the water renders down. So if that didn't happen, the movie would not have gotten finished.
Right, but and that's the thing, people don't realize it wasn't just getting water rendered, but it was like murky water and bright daylit water and a deep sea water and surface water. Just the environments, we can say it's underwater, but the range of environment underwater is just mind-blowing when you really examine. And it shouldn't be the main focus as you're watching. It should be focusing on story, but when you step back to review all that you accomplished in shaping these different parts of this world, it's mind-blowing, just incredible. Visually a feast. So.
And what was also exciting was this was really the first film where I got also to be involved in managing the story process.
Yeah, you were associating
So
on this. So this was your um, opportunity to kind of blend and move into the story side of things. Talk a little bit about straddling those worlds.
well, it was exciting because it was a new challenge. You know, up till then, most of my challenges in filmmaking had always been about technology, about how do you advance that technology to innovate the medium. But here I was, you know, I had a responsibility and a role where, you know, Andy was telling this amazing story, but I remember watching the first set of reels and it was, you know, almost 3 hours long. And we're like, okay, well, we've got a lot of story. We got to figure out how to streamline the story and turn it into a movie. And so it became another challenge, but a good one because I was working with some of the best, you know, talent in animation.
Yeah.
And to watch that whole process of how you hone down that story and how you work with editorial, not just the story team, but how story and editorial all work together in making a movie. And that to me was a really great learning process. And seeing how we evolved that storyboard and animatics into layout, and then how it becomes shot production. Again, you know, having this great group of technologists, you know, I didn't have to like focus just on the technology piece of it, but I could be really integrated into the whole filmmaking process. So it was very, very exciting for me.
Yeah, my gosh. And you know, I would think expanding, seeing new areas and new ways that your expertise can be applied to the art form. Now, from there, you moved on to something entirely different. And Nemo was a multi-award winning film, but that brought you to an independent film.
Right. So after Nemo was done, you know, I was told that it'd be probably, you know, 3-5 years before you would probably make another movie. And I was like, but I'm a filmmaker. I want to make movies. And I was also starting to feel like, you know, there's so many different types of stories that we can tell. And so I left Pixar after Nemo and got involved in a couple other movies that some got made, some didn't get made. And ultimately, I remember tracking Shane Acker when he won that Studio Academy Award, going like, oh my God, here's this, you know, young talent telling a different kind of story. And then when I saw that film get announced, I was like going, now, why didn't I know about this? You know? And I was like, darn, you know, how did I miss this and miss this opportunity? But luckily, for my advantage, the film got into trouble.
Ah.
And so I got a call from, the film was a Focus Features film, and it was independently produced. So it had a bond on the film. And my neighbor across the street, she worked for the bond company, and she knew what the work I was doing. And so when this film got into trouble, they called me and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm available. And they said, well, we have this film called 9 that's in trouble. Can you get on an airplane, go to Luxembourg? I said, absolutely. So I had a very fortunate situation where I got on a plane, went to Luxembourg, and they were making this movie, and no one really understood how to make a CG film. And at the time, the reason that the production was in Luxembourg was to get all the tax credits.
Oh.
But they were working with a studio that did motion capture, and they had put it in Luxembourg to get the tax incentives, but there were no CG work being done in Luxembourg. It was all traditional animation. So they were there, spent pretty much all the money, and they had nothing to show, or very little to show. And so the bond company and Focus executives looked at me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, this is an amazing movie. You got to finish this. We got to figure out how to do this." And so we came up with a plan. And at the time, I knew a studio called Stars Animation in Toronto. And I knew that they had no work. But a good colleague of mine from Disney, David Steinberg, was heading that studio. So I said, "I think I know where to take this movie." And so I called David and I said, "There's an opportunity to make, to finish Shane Acker's movie." And he said, "Okay, we're on for this." And their animators have been animating basically a lot of home video quality films. So I said, "Well, but we still have to get the best animation." And so I said, "Well, maybe we can split this movie where, some of the toughest scenes can go to Ken Duncan's studio." He had just started Duncan Studio.
Yeah.
So managed to pitch this idea to both the bond company and Focus, and they agreed. So off we went. We came back. Everybody came back from Luxembourg, and we reworked the story. The story wasn't working, and spent 6 months reworking the story in Pasadena at Duncan Studio, while Stars was, setting up the pipeline to be able to do this film. And miraculously, we made this film. And I'm really proud of it because, Shane was the first-time director who had a vision and a short. And it was a challenge, but it also pushed our medium to tell a different type of story.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
So it was very exciting.
Another lineup of executive producers came on board, and a lot of people came from the industry, and even live action film came to support this film and
yes,
believe in it. And Shane, yes, a first-time director, having created the short, but so what kind of challenges did that present? I mean, clearly he was open to getting the support and belief that everybody stepped in with. And it is a very different, to me, this film really pushed the boundaries of where animation can go in terms of storytelling, I think. One of our great recent examples of that, and is well worth absorbing again, because it's just so amazing. It's just such an incredible world created. How did your role in terms of again, technology and now storytelling, where do you feel you brought your best efforts on this film?
Well, so story wasn't working, and so we talked a lot about how to make the story work, but we also had to deal with complexity because we had a very limited budget, since most of the money had been spent in Luxembourg. So we didn't have a whole lot of money left. So we had to say, okay, how do we tell the best story, simplify the story, and reduce the complexity in visual storytelling? So we use a lot of matte paintings. Shane had really figured out how to keep the designs of these characters simple. And so we said, we need to get, a lot of emotion out of these characters. So we knew that we had to get really great animators. And so I think my contribution was bringing Ken Duncan and his people, his animators, to help us with animation as well. We recruited a lot of talented animators in Canada. And then working together with Kevin Adams and Jeff Bell at Stars, Shane designed the film so that we could reduce the complexity, and we used a lot of matte paintings wherever we could.
And when you say you reduce the complexity, I think it's one of the more sophisticated films visually And if you were, simplifying that even or reducing it, it's still such an incredible film visually. I love the very kind of implied storyline throughout, which holds up beautifully. It's just, I think, masterful storytelling, beautifully done. And again, you innovative in what you bring to it. That word just keeps coming back. Now, from there, with that film, that took a nomination. Yes, it was a.
We got some Annie nominations, VS nominations, but we did not get an Academy nomination for this.
One of the sadly overlooked films of our times, I think, and it's well worth. I put that on my required viewing list for my students because
Thank you.
Really is a great. It speaks to the range of what can be done and should be done. We need more of that. Now, your next challenge, which again, I'm going to jump back into a little bit of sharing here. You again pushed the boundary in terms of story. Tell us about your work on The Illusionist?
So by the time 9 got finished, I think I got to be known as the person that can go fix people's problems.
That's a good thing.
So Pathé had been working on The Illusionist with Sylvain Chomaine, and they built a little studio in Edinburgh, Scotland, to do this beautiful film. And they got into trouble. So this film wasn't bonded, but the executive at Pathé called the bond company in London and said, I think this movie's in trouble. Do you have someone that can help?
We're brought in as the fixer.
Yeah, so I got a call and ended up in Edinburgh and met this wonderful group of animators. And it was very interesting because they were trying to put a 2D pipeline together, but no one actually knew how to do that. And so they kind of made it up. And so I got there and I said, where are your layouts? And the animator looked at me and said, well, we don't have layouts. I'm like, okay, then I hire the animating. And then when they started showing me the drawings, you could see that they were making layout as they were animating. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a challenge. And again, this was another situation where bulk of the money had been spent and very little to show. And so we had to come up with a plan of how to get this movie finished. And also there were some beautiful scenes that was fully completed, but story-wise, it wasn't working. And so it ended up in the cutting floor, unfortunately. And that's always a challenge because, these artists have worked so hard, and especially on this movie.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Every frame that they had produced was just beautiful. But it just didn't work story-wise, and we said, okay, it has to get on the cutting floor. And it's hard because, you've got to keep your artists going. And, there's going to be scenes that they've spent so much energy and passion, and now it's on the cutting floor.
Now, falling out of love with your footage so that it's you can get to the essence of story and
yeah, and and then part of my job as a producer is you've got to keep that team motivated, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so we have to be better disciplined about how we build these stories so that you're not putting a situation to the hands of the animators and artists where they're feeling thankless because now they've got to redo all the work, or the most beautiful scene that they've animated or painted is on the cutting floor. So I think, I think one of the things that you have to learn as a producer is, when is a scene ready to go into production versus when does it need more time and story to protect the movie and the story, and to protect the team, because it takes a team to make these movies.
You know, again, that speaks to your unique position as a producer, having come from these various diversity of the background of your talents and skills. You are able to go in and be the fixer, to pinpoint and to coalesce the magic and put it forward. This is a stunning film, just such a beautiful visual treat, a feast. And this did get a nomination, yes?
Yes, it did.
Good. And took a number of other awards. How long was that process by the time you got involved before you were able to get it finalized?
Let's see. I think the film was in production for about almost probably 30 months, 36 months before I got involved.
Wow.
And then I was involved for the last, on and off for about the last, I think about 14, 16 months.
Astounding. Just amazing, the magic you work and what you do. Now, from this film to one of my personal favorites, this is such a treasure. And a film that, again, had some challenges in the course of its production. How early, at what point were you brought onto this film?
So I was very fortunate. Having worked with Shane had recommended me to Mark Osborne. So Mark and I met after Mark had finished Kung Fu Panda. And we both kind of went on our separate path. And then he was telling me that he was going to go do The Little Prince. And I was like, oh my God, this is one of my favorite books of all times. And I had discovered this book when I studied in Switzerland after I got out of high school, before I went to college. And had learned French reading The Little Prince. So this was a very special book for me. And he said he was going to go off to France to do this. And I was like, oh, I wish I can be a producer. And he was saying that, you know, the French producers needed to make sure they had to qualify, had to be a French person, blah, blah, blah. So fortunately didn't get that gig. And I wished Mark best of luck. And then, lo and behold, Mark calls me and says, I'm being told this movie is going to Canada. And he said, I've told my agent, I told the French producers, you know, I want to bring Jinko. So I was very fortunate again, and flew to Paris and met the team. And
were they in production? Had quite a bit been completed at this point, or was it?
No, they were still in pre-production, doing design work, getting the movie up on reels, and trying to figure out how to budget this movie. And so it was pretty early on. So I was very fortunate, or I wasn't going in to fix a movie that was, you know, in production that was broken. It was basically, they were saying, we're going to Canada.
Well, and with the production challenges on this film, working in different mediums and getting that to coalesce into such a charming, magical, lovely story, what kind of, you know, that had to have pulled out all the stops for you in terms of your experience, your insights, your talents, your backgrounds, the perfect blend of all that you do.
Well, I credit this to Mark. I mean, Mark had such a vision about wanting to tell the story using both stop motion and CG. And so, you know, it was really, I was there to facilitate, to bring that vision. And, you know, we were working with the CG studio in Montreal. That was basically a ground up studio.
Mm.
And then the stop motion unit was a separate unit that got built outside. And what was great was that, you know, everyone knew Mark, loved Kung Fu Panda, and of course everyone loves The Little Prince. So, we were able to recruit throughout Canada. We had some people come from the US, and obviously there was a French crew that came from Paris that wanted to continue to work on the film. So we had a really international crew. And, this was also a time where I knew it was really important to have gender parity in our industry. And I think, Mark was such a leader at this in wanting to make sure that the hero character was a woman or a little girl versus a little boy. And to me, that was a very important part of the journey. And the little girl is literally in every shot of the movie.
Yeah.
So we worked hard to recruit female animators. And it was really the first film where we had a lot of female animators, because up till then, female animators were pretty much token. But it was really important to Mark that we were telling a story about the little girl, and you have to do that. You need female animators. And so as hard as it was to, build a team, build a pipeline, work in both CG and stop motion, the satisfaction of what, we're doing to move the animation industry was, reflecting back, was such a satisfying experience.
Oh gosh, yeah. And the challenges, I think, in as you said, building that team. Now, this film came out in 2015. So this was right, as you said, at the beginning of this your Women in Animation and other organizations, Gina Davis and her great work in really locking down numbers and taking a logical, factual look at where women have been. So it's a real pivot point. And again, as a leader, an animation leader, there was a conscious choice, and there you are at the forefront of that. How were there challenges in finding the talent? Because as we know, more women are studying animation today. We need to get the industry shifted more, which is changing, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But at that time, what was the horizon like? Were you finding women?
We were very fortunate in Canada, because I think in Canada, the animation industry at that point was still pretty much a migrant worker type of a career. And they all came because they wanted to work with Mark. They all wanted to work with him on The Little Prince. And I remember Pixar had a studio in Vancouver, and they were shutting down. And I called the head of studio at Pixar in Vancouver, and I said to Amir, because he and I had been colleagues at Disney, and I said to Amir, I know you're shutting down. You've got some talent. We'd love to have them. And he didn't think they were going to go, but we already had animators that had gone from Vancouver all the way to Montreal. So I was like, okay, I can't give up. I gotta try and get that best talent. And we did. So, I think part of what I love about animation, especially when you're working outside of these big studios, is that you're constantly, discovering that new talent.
Yeah.
Because that new talent will really, as you and I've talked about, is, how do we move our culture forward? Is bringing those new voices, discovering that new talent from all parts of the world so that they can tell their stories. And so to me, that's the exciting part about the global market of animation, is that,
that ability to reach out and to find the talent, as you said. Now, story-wise, you just to kind of bring everybody up to speed with where your career has continued, then you moved on to the Lego Movie 2 and accomplished quite a bit there with that film, presenting some interesting challenges that you were able to oversee. And then Klaus, of course, forever changing, bringing back 2D animation, but then also a real cornerstone for the Netflix animation realm, which is now giant powerhouse, working with Sergio and an international team of talent. Talk a little bit about how you built. You were there from the very beginning, correct, on Klaus, or fairly
So
early?
I was there at the very beginning after Sergio had finished the development work, and Sergio had reached out to me before he started the development, or when he put the original concept together, and he pitched me the idea. And I said, Sergio, I don't think this is a movie. I think it's like a children's book. Which he reminded me years later that I had actually said that to him. And then he went off and developed and did this test. And then he reached out to me at Annecy in 2015. And I was blown away. I was like, Sergio, we got to figure out how to make this movie. And so we went out to pitch. The studios all loved it, but they said, not a temple movie. You know, Christmas is a temple in animation. And so, but we were not going to give up. But meanwhile, Warner Brothers reached out and said, hey, we got some movies. And I was like, okay, Sergio, I haven't worked in a year, so I should probably get a job. We'll continue to look for a home. And literally, I think the week I signed up to do Lego 2, because I was interested also to get back into the big studio films and to work on a sequel, because I was curious, how do you make a really good sequel story? So I thought, well, you know, the first Lego movie was brilliant. Lord and Miller are writing the second one. I want to see that process, the creative process. So I had signed up to do that movie. Same week, Sergio and I got a call from Netflix, and we went to at that point, Netflix was still in Beverly Hills, and we went to pitch to the executive who was looking for a Christmas romantic comedy. So Sergio was in the studio in Madrid, and I drove down to the Beverly Hills office, and Sergio's so great, just such a master storyteller. And here we're on Skype, Sergio's pitching, and I'm in a room with execs. And they loved it, and they said, okay, we want it for Christmas, 2018.
No pressure there.
Or 2019, sorry, 2019. And I was like, oh my God, here we are, 2016.
You've got to move.
And here I was on Lego 2.
Oh.
And so I said, Sergio, we'll find you a producer. And got on a producer and started recruiting. And, Sergio's also another great filmmaker that knows how to seek for that talent. How do we find that young talent that we can take that talent and really develop their talent?
And that was the case on that film. You had such a global and international team just seeking out talent, and a lot of new talent, a lot of fresh artists, many of which this was their first feature.
Right.
Talk about that process a little bit.
So, of course, you're working on a much smaller budget. So you can't have the A-star from all around the world, and everybody wanted to work on Klaus. They saw the test that he had put out there. And so there was a lot of following of both young and old talent. And, Sergio relentlessly, went after that best talent, whether they were just out of school or there were people coming back into animation after leaving 2D animation. So the talent came from all around the globe. And it was a lot of work for Sergio and Marissa to find that talent, bring them into Madrid, get them relocated, get them housed, get them trained. And eventually Sergio's studio in Madrid moved outside of Madrid. So then Sergio and Marissa have to figure out how to get them bussed in every day. And And, the work goes towards, both of them really building this spa studio and bringing that talent
And in
to
addition
make the film.
to the actual physical studio in Spain, you had a lot of other talent working remotely as well. Yes.
We had some. I mean, it wasn't a lot of talent, but we had some great animators. For example, James Baxter,
Mm-hmm.
who's at Netflix now, and so we had some of Sergio's favorite animators over the years, and that came and animated. And then with cleanup, I mean, we knew that we couldn't build a studio to house all the cleanup artists. So we looked at outsourcing cleanup, but half of cleanup, but the rest of it was all internal.
And you also found, that's getting back to this approach of actively working on gender parity. I think sort of in seeking out talent, I know Sergio spoke about the pleasant discovery that it was quite equitable when you focus on talent, and the talent is out there.
Totally.
You will achieve that or come very, very close, more so than we have in the past. So
yeah, I mean, Klaus almost said gender parity.
Yeah, so it easily can be done.
It totally can be. And as you mentioned, if you look at the stats all around the globe, girls are studying animation more than boys today. So that has changed, and that started in the early, back to probably about 2010. You could see the numbers where over 60% of students studying animation are women versus men. So the talent is there to feed the pipeline.
And now the ability to get those stories told, I think we just have to work in getting women more equitably placed in those higher roles.
Yeah, and I credit Netflix for that. I mean, Melissa Cobb, she reached out to me and said, she wanted women directors, and I said they're there,
She's dynamite.
And I gave 3 names, and she hired all 3 of them, and I was like, it can be done, and so it's great to see a lot of leadership today, especially in the U.S., where the studios are run by women, right? And they know how important parity is. And it's not just gender, but, we need to look at race. Yes. We need to look at culture. We need to look at, that we need parity all around.
And when we look at story, Klaus, a film based on an origin story of a classic tale, that there's a global audience that can embrace this story. It isn't just an American or a regional story. It has universal themes. So when you are choosing projects and films, what do you look for? Let's talk about how culture plays a role and how you can move that forward through story and the choices that you're making and the projects that you take on.
Well, first of all, I mean, the filmmaker and story, those 2 things are the most important thing to me, is that that I love to be creatively challenged.
Yeah.
And so I'm always looking for opportunities to tell stories with filmmakers that want to innovate our medium and tell meaningful stories that have, meaningful themes and meaningful messages, because animation is such a powerful medium. And, I go back to for me, The Lady and Tramp, how that influenced me as a child. And I know that it can influence children, it can influence adults, and to be able to create these magical characters and worlds that really influence in a positive way. Yeah. So that's what's important to me. And that now that there's so many outlets for animation, it's not just the big tentpole movies, but with streamers, there's opportunities to tell all kinds of stories. and that there's a big appetite, for like example for me, anime is such a rich medium, or there's so many different types of story. Any genre of story can be told, from sci-fi to fantasy to comedy, and anime works in Japan for all ages, and I want animation to do the same thing, and there's that opportunity now. And with COVID happening, now we're working virtually, so that means there are no more boundaries. People are working off the computers, so you can bring artists from all around the globe. You're not going to be restricted to, well, they couldn't get a visa.
Right.
So I'm hoping that being able to work more virtually, what means being able to bring more people from different cultures.
Absolutely. I think it's, again, you've been at the forefront of this, of pushing these boundaries and getting us to this point. You really are one of our trailblazers in terms of digital animation. And then here we are now, in light of our current circumstances, where production can still be moving forward. And suddenly animation is the saving grace of an entire industry, largely due to your pioneering efforts, you and many others, but being at the forefront. And so talk about how, we are full circle, for you at least, very full circle in terms of what we can be doing creatively. Where do you think that will take us in terms of stories and talent?
Well, the more we can diversify talent, you're allowing different voices to come in so that they can tell stories, as you were pointing out, stories, there's so many different stories for every culture. And being able to share those stories globally, I think, is really important. One of my favorite books is Journey to the West. And Journey to the West is a very well-known title in the Eastern Hemisphere. It's a complex tale, but every year in Japan, Korea, China, wherever in Asia, there is a version of Journey to the West, or also known as the Monkey King, is being told. That story can be told for the worldwide audience. Like, we can take an American story and make it appeal to the worldwide audience. But, that hasn't quite happened. But I think, there's stories all around the globe. I'm sure there are African tales that, can be told, as there could be Arabic, there's all those opportunities that allows us to be richer culturally, because you want talent from authentic voice. Yes, it's great to see the Mulans and the Aladdins that is Disney-fied, but I want to hear stories that can be told from the people, from their culture,
Where their story of origin, yeah.
Right? And make it universal.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so again, I think that's where I think we can move our culture forward.
And is it tapping into archetypes and tapping into common themes? What speaks to you in terms of these stories? Because you mentioned where the Monkey King may not be as universally told yet. I have a feeling you're going to be at the forefront of that. So.
Well, the good news is there's a Monkey King told every year. So hopefully before I retire, I will get a chance to do a Monkey King. We'll see, But yeah.
Is it themes? Is it characterizations? Is it, what can be done as storytellers to sort of bridge those, for us to tap into those common themes? What do you feel can be done?
Well, they're all emotional stories about human lives, right? Mm-hmm. So I was so excited when Parasite won the Oscar this year. And last year, year before, there was a Japanese film called Shoplifters. Also, it's an underbelly. Unfortunately, you got to show the dark side before you can show the light side, right?
Mm.
But to talk about the underbelly, to talk about society and talk about our, human race from different cultural aspects, but there's still commonality to these stories, and we all can relate to. And so I think live action has really done a great job doing that, and I hope we can do the same thing in animation, where we can take those stories that are, there's a cultural root, but they're universal stories because they're about characters and emotion.
Do you see that as the next horizon for you to focus on? Clearly, the choices you've made and the projects that you're doing, that's happened. But is that a conscious choice on your part for everything you're doing?
I would like to. I've been very fortunate, throughout my career, how I've stumbled from one great project to another great project, and I feel very, very fortunate and feel serendipitous, But I think, I'm at a point in my career in my life where I want to make conscious choices of the stories that I'm involved in, because I do want to see change happen. And especially after 2020, there's a momentum. So it's important to create sustainability to this momentum that we're starting to build. And so it's important for me that I become vocal about this and really take the action and tell those stories that need to be told.
Well, you've gone from Klaus, which again, a multi-award winning and Oscar-nominated film, a transformative film, a long struggle to make that happen, but you guys took so many great awards with this tremendous accomplishment, and it's fired up the industry in so many ways. But you also continue your work with so many of the great organizations that are part of the industry, just a strong presence and leader in many ways. Talk a little bit about your work within the industry itself and how you're working to bring this international cultural transitions, enlightenment to each of these organizations.
Well, I think everyone in Hollywood is recognizing the importance, right, of diversity and inclusion. And back a couple of years ago, when we were pushing at WIA the 50-50 gender parity, we said, not including women, you're leaving money on the table.
Money will get their attention.
Right? So it's the same thing. I think, I'm very fortunate that at the Academy, they've invited me to be part of the inclusion diversity efforts, which is also very important in terms of being able to tell stories that are richer stories. And so it's, my job is really trying to, find that new talent, make sure that their voices get heard, and mentor the next generation of talent. So those are important things for me, to seek and discover that new talent, and so that they're continuing to, tell the next generation stories.
Yeah, and you're again blazing trails in cultivating that within the organizations of the industry, but getting them to rethink, reapproach, and understand the importance of this. Again, you're blazing trails everywhere, and it's powerful. You've got mentor programs that you've started. Getting the pipeline from the schools into the industry, bridging that gap. It seems that's been a big part of where the breakdown has fallen. terms of getting women into the industry. But again, you're at the forefront of making those transitions now. You were mentioning earlier that there are new studies that have just come out, reaching the goal is 50-50 by 2025. Are we on track for that?
We're getting closer. We're doing better. So last year we made an incremental increase within the 839 union with a 4% increase. So I think all the studios, I mean, it takes all of us, right? It's not just one person. It takes every single one of us and all the studios being conscious about making this shift. So I'm really, really proud that it's going to happen. I think it can happen. I mean, we can feed a pipeline. You know, we have mentoring programs to keep them in place and get them to succeed and get them to achieve their dreams and their goals and not lead the business. And it's interesting. I was reading stats over the weekend that 70% of the mothers are working today with children less than 3. Now, if they can work virtually, that means that these moms can continue to work in animation. So that's a really good thing coming out of COVID. As hard as it is for us all working from home, is that I think it's going to give opportunities so that people don't have to, you know, make a choice between motherhood and career.
Well, now that the pipeline is up and running in this regard, I'm finding a lot of industries are moving to virtual office spaces and shutting down. Where do you stand on the importance of keeping artists together in some way? Are there strengths? Are there?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's a collaborative medium. So it is hard when we're all not in the room working together. Everything takes much longer with much more effort. We have to be much more deliberate in our communication. And I miss, you know, working with the filmmakers and all the artists. But so I think we have to figure out what is that equal balance, right? Because you want to give opportunities for the people that can't leave their home to still continue to prosper and develop their careers. So it'll be a good, you know, balancing act. Mark Osborne and I are making our next film together for Netflix. And when COVID hit, you know, we were in New York, but we already had some artists already working remotely and virtually because again, you know, Mark and I always want the best talent. And so we had story artists in Europe. We had visual development artists also abroad. So when COVID hit, we quickly, literally within 24 hours, was working virtually. But now we're all working virtually, which is hard and sad. And so hopefully we'll get to a place where, you know, we'll be in a safer place again where it's a combination.
But you're able to still keep things moving, thankfully, to be able to meet deadlines. And, you know, I'm grateful for these opportunities to be able to keep things going creatively and in terms of our incomes. But I know it is presenting some challenges for a lot of folks.
And then think of the opportunities that you're bringing now, you and Tina and CTN and others that are doing these virtual panels, right?
Yeah.
Which is really exciting because, you know, in the past, you know, a lot of times we can't travel, so we can't do these conversations or have these panels, and they're so helpful, I think.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can do this virtually means that, yeah, if you can block 2 hours, you know, you can share your stories with others.
That's the goal. And it's working towards making this an opportunity rather than an obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
That mindset, that difference in what we're doing. So I'm ever grateful for that. And I want to open it up. We've got some wonderful questions going by. Matt, I want to hand it to you, and we can start fielding some of the great questions we have.
Yeah, I'll just jump to the first question here. As a producer, what do you look for in a good script? How can you tell if it's a good story for feature animation? Well,
so it's important to have stories that cannot be, I mean, is about characters and worlds, right? So we want to be able to tell stories, the human stories that we can all relate to emotionally, but we want to create worlds and characters that can't be told in other mediums, meaning live action. So I'm always looking for relationships and worlds that we can create.
I'll move to the next question then. Through your experience, when a story or movie does not work, is there a specific area of a story that usually fails, or what is the most important part of a story, do you think?
Well, it's really about the characters, right? So it's character development, and if you don't have interesting characters, and then you don't have an interesting story. I mean, plot is easy. It's about the characters, their journey. That's the one that is always a challenge. Who are these characters? What are their wants? What are their needs? And then having a relationship with other characters within the story. And so if you can't get substance out of that, you can have the best plot in the world, the story's not going to work.
Well, this next question, he's asking that they've heard of an otherwise good story that was ruined by last-minute change to appeal to a general public. As a producer, what is your view to this, and what is the need to satisfy the public?
Well, I think it's always a challenge because, every film goes through focus groups, because obviously the studios and the financiers all want to maximize box office and viewership. So they're always looking to see what's working or what's not working. And when something isn't working, they want to come up with solutions that will get more numbers. And so I think sometimes if we're not careful, we're going to dumb down the story because we may get some responses skewing for us to make a change that may not be good for a story. So that's a constant battle that I think we have as filmmakers, wanting to make sure that we're protecting the authentic story. At the same time, we have to be cognizant about a note so that, there's that balance.
Can you talk a little bit about working with unknown technology during a production deadline?
Yes. So first of all, I'm not afraid of unknown technology. I think, you have to plan for it. So you got to plan for it where you're spending enough time to be able to know that it's going to work. And then you got to be able to make sure that you have enough time to be able to scale it so that it does work in production. Just because you can do a great test doesn't mean you can scale it. So it's about planning and knowing what to take risks and also having a plan B if something isn't going to work. What's your plan B?
And have you had any instances where either the technology just wasn't ready or you had to do some workarounds in order to meet the deadlines?
Yeah, constantly. I mean, constantly, you're going to be put in a situation when you're working with new technologies where, the best plan doesn't work. So that's why it's important to have a plan B in place.
And other backups in place.
When your plan B becomes plan A, you better have another plan B. But you know what it is, what's miraculous about filmmaking is that when you get a group of great people together, there's a will, there's a way, whether we band-aid this thing, it just happens, and it's a film. It's not, we're not saving lives here. So you can cheat,
Well, and I think that speaks to your staffing and your, the minds, the collective minds that you surround yourself with that are eager to bring solutions to the table and come with their bag of magic tricks and and their diverse backgrounds to give you that sense. And it speaks to your talents in making those choices, but also your talents in listening and providing a forum for where they feel they can meet those challenges comfortably and supportively. And that's not often found in the industry. So more so, I think, in animation, because there are more challenges that tend to present themselves. But that speaks well to you and the talent you've surrounded yourself with. So
Thank you.
Matt, let's keep going. I think we've got a few more there.
What are some of the skill set differences between a production artist and an independent creator working on your own independent property, your intellectual property?
Can you repeat that question again?
What are some of the skill set differences between a production artist and an independent creator working on their own projects?
Well, one of the things is that, if you're working on a large scale movie, we're looking for people with specific skills. And so a lot of the artists that work in the larger films tend to focus on one skill set and making sure that they excel. I think when you're an independent creator, you have to be able to wear multiple hats. And so they tend to, obviously there's always a strong suit in what they do, whether it's design or animation or writing. But I think, being an independent creator, you have to be able to do it all. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I think it kind of leads into this next question, which is, what are some skills do you suggest an artist cultivate other than their art skills?
Well, obviously, we're always looking for the best talent in terms of artistry. And so, and we're also looking for people who are good storytellers. So if you can translate your art into storytelling, that is something that, we want, because we want, we want these artists to be part of storytelling. We want them to be part of filmmaking. It's not just a task of animating or doing layout. We want everyone to be storytellers.
This next question is, as a woman, what advice do you have for up-and-coming women artists?
Well, I keep saying, if you have a dream and passion, don't let your gender or your race stop you. Surround yourself with the best, talent around you. And, don't be afraid. Because you don't look like them, don't be afraid. This is what you want to do. Your talent will, it'll show that you have talent, and people will come to you because of the talent you bring, not because of what you look like.
Do you feel like story and storytelling has changed since your first project?
Yes. I think, for me, I come from the technical side. So as much as I love movies and much as I love watching stories, and I think, my visual skills are probably much stronger than my storytelling skills. And so what's been great over the last, last decade or so is that being involved more in the storytelling part of it is that I'm being challenged to give notes. I can always see a problem. Coming up with a solution is still a challenge because I'm not a writer, per se. Whereas I can look at something that's a problem and I can fix problems. But identifying story problem is something I can do, but having those solutions is not something that I'm strong at this point.
Tim from the chat is asking, or they say, I've been told continuous escalating tension is very important in a movie. Do you think it's true? And do you think one must write escalating tension into the act of the story?
I mean, tension is good, but I think, you have to have a reason for the tension. So if it's about, character relationships, what's the end result are you looking for from that tension?
As long as it's not hindering the overall production process and and adding to the drama of getting the film done. We don't want to add tension to it, but keep the tension on the screen.
Yeah.
And in the room. What do you look for when you are qualities in an artist? Are you looking beyond artists you might hire, work, or bring on board? Are you looking beyond the portfolio or the range of work they've done? Are you looking to them as a well-rounded person, or their backgrounds, their home? What else do you look to in your artists that you are bringing?
Well, I want to make sure that they're a team player and that they know how to collaborate. Because you can be the most gifted artist, but if you don't know how to collaborate, we're a collaborative team. Yes, we do make exceptions to certain geniuses, at times, but I think, it's important that they're people that know how to collaborate, that know how to communicate, that work well with others. I'm also looking for artists that have authentic voices.
And do they talk a little bit about what you look for in terms of collaboration? Because it's a term we banty around quite a bit. It is a collaborative process, but I find it interesting that we never really examine that. We never talk about, the ability to be open to suggestion or to make positive critiques, or to, and even as women, things are shifting, but our ability to speak up, to be comfortable with having our voices expressed and actually being heard. I think we need a change. That's something we also have to adjust in our creative or corporate settings, is making that collaborative process more inclusive for races and genders and differences. Talk a little bit about, do you have set rules? Do you actively seek everyone at the table's opinions? How do you cultivate that?
Well, I think, first of all, the environment is very important, right? You have to have an environment where people feel safe, where they can share their opinions, their thoughts. And it's not about right or wrong. It's really about being able to share that. So creating that environment where you're making sure that there's someone sitting at the corner that never speaks up, but that they've got some thoughts, and encouraging them to speak up. And sometimes it means that, you don't do it in the open room, but you have a conversation with them, and, you get to know these people individually, and that they all have, they're great artists. That they all have opinion, they all have thoughts. And again, it's encouraging them and creating that safe environment so that they can share and not feel like they're being ostracized,
I think there's a need for more conversation about that, developing, cultivating skills amongst executives and creatives and studio heads, and to educate them a little bit on working with creatives and what needs to be done. And so that's all, I think, part of this that needs to take shape a little bit.
Right, because there's a lot of unconscious bias in a room, right?
Yeah, very much.
So if you don't look like them, they're not going to listen to you. So how do you communicate so that they do listen to you? And and how do you engage them?
And to establish an environment where that is fostered, and the ripple effect continues out amongst everyone. With the historic work I do, that was certainly the case, but there was still rivalry and still, challenges and limitations and unconscious biases that prevented progress and growth for artists who probably should have been progressing sooner.
Right, and you have to give them credit, right? Openly saying, so-and-so said this, or so-and-so did this,
Right.
So that, especially the people that are marginalized.
Yes.
and because, you know, if someone does, you know, and you've got to equalize that playing field. And so that's where I think, you know, you have to be conscious about the biases and making sure that you're equalizing it by saying, this person said this, or this person did this, and giving them credit so that they become visible rather than invisible.
It's an important position of power that I think creative leaders have, and I think the more that can be cultivated, that'll help with getting us to our parity within terms of representation.
Yeah, and we, you know, I have to do this constantly myself, because, you know, when someone says to me, oh, I'm looking for such and such, or, you know, we immediately think of people that we know, and then when you make your list, it's like, oh my God, it's all white dudes. And then go, okay, that's a problem. Not that they're a problem, it's a problem of if you want to move our culture forward, you know, we have to be inclusive. So you've got to do the extra work, and you've got to reach out and say, okay, I'm looking for this kind of person, this skill set, but do you know anyone that's a woman, or do you know someone of color, or do you know somebody from this country or this background, you know? And we have to make that conscious effort to look for that. You know, it's easy to just go, here's my list.
Right. And I think therein is it's being conscious of the need to be doing that by the creative leaders out there. And as you say, we all have that unconscious bias where we default to our go-to people. Just even in conversation, oh yeah, we're looking for someone, he's got to be, just even that reference of he sends a message that excludes a good half of more of the talent out there. So by becoming conscious of these things, and again, you've been a real trailblazer with that, and setting the example and showing others, which I think is an even more powerful way of getting change to happen.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I had to forget for a long, long time that I was woman and Japanese to get to where I am, you know? And it's really the last, you know, it's really the last 10 years where I've, you know, said, I have to make sure that people know that I'm not one of them. And being involved with Women in Animation, being involved with Academy, I mean, it's given me a platform where I want to help others. You know, I don't want them to have gone through what I've gone through, you know, of you know, not being able to say who you are. You know, we just do the work, and we're best at what we do, and that's why we get hired. But I think it's important to move the culture forward. We have to be able to openly talk about the fact that, you know, I don't look like you.
Right. And because of that, you're going to bring something even more extraordinary to the
right.
team.
We'll bring diversity into our storytelling, right?
Yeah. It was at the most recent Academy screening, and one of the for the nominees, you were there, and Bonnie and many other terrific talent were there. And one of the panelists said he had never heard the word no in his career at a particular studio. And I remember collectively thinking with another colleague I was with, and we both went, what does that feel like? Because as a woman, we've not known that. We just can't even get in the room sometimes to even be able to hear the word no. But if we are in the room, more often than not, we're hearing the word no. And so it's about shifting that and creating a more open and positive experience for young talent and talent of all ages to be able to get their voices heard. Talk a little bit about, we are focused as an industry on young talent coming out of schools and getting those opportunities, but what about established artists who reach a point in their career where there's a bit of ageism happening, or a cultural difference that others just can't get past? Talk about how we could bridge those gaps.
Well, it's hard because, I think us being artists and filmmakers, we have to constantly be reinventing ourselves, right? And challenging ourselves so that we don't get bypassed. And so it's both an internal and external work we have to do. You know, we can certainly influence externally to make sure that that there isn't, you know, bias towards people that are over 40 or 50, right? But internally, we as humans also have to do our part in being able to evolve and being able to still contribute and bring value. So I think it's a two-way street.
Very true. Agreed. I think that's something that we could have further conversations on in terms of how we make that happen and change, affect it a bit more industry. Matt, I'm seeing a few more comments. Let's make sure we get everybody's questions asked and answered.
Yeah, this next question is from Mason, who's wondering, what are the top priorities when approaching an indie project in terms of production?
I guess it would help me to understand the question better if I can understand when you say indie projects, how this person is seeing this question different from non-indie projects.
Maybe we can get them to elaborate.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I want to make sure I answer the question properly. So,
if apologies, but the person who asked that question, if you could maybe expand, and we'll move on to the next question and maybe circle back.
Yeah, okay. So the next question is from Steve, who is wondering if you could go a little bit more into how you prepared schedules to finalize projects like The Illusionist, where the funding was almost used up and the deadline was quickly approaching.
Well, first of all, you got to be realistic about, you know, finish any movie. So you have to put a plan together based on the resources you have and the limitations, and then, you know, you put the best plan forward, and then of course if you need more money you have to go and negotiate for that additional money. And you know, you may not get all the money you need or you want, and then you have to make choices, which means it's compromises. So for example, on The Illusionist, you know, cleanup became a big factor, both from schedule wise and money wise. And so the big compromise we had to make was that we had to outsource cleanup to a lower labor cost, which meant we knew that we were not getting the highest quality we wanted, but it was a choice of either getting the movie finished or not. And so we went through and made choices about what we kept in cleanup locally and what we had to outsource.
Mason has clarified, saying that by indie projects, they meant in terms of a small budget and a small team.
Okay, so if you could just ask that question again in full again.
They're wondering what the top priorities are in terms of production for a project with a small budget and a small team.
I think you have to be realistic about the story you want to tell and the techniques that you're going to use, meaning what is your film going to look like? So obviously, you know, if you're working at indie film, you're not going to be able to create, you know, films that look like a Pixar movie or a Disney movie in terms of richness and complexity. So I would look at the scale and the scope of the story that you want to tell. And if you have a story that has a lot of scope and scale, then you're going to have to look at how do I visually tell this story technique-wise that is affordable and doable within the constraints you have.
Awesome. Mason's also asking, how do you scout for talent?
Well, today Instagram is your best friend, and the internet is best friend. So, you know, talent is everywhere. Schools are good places to start. you know, looking at shorts online, another good place to seek for talent.
CTN
Going to CTN, going to festivals,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah. And I think there are also great opportunities for artists to not only tighten and expand and advance their training and skills through each of these avenues. Talk a little bit about what you like to see. You know, or what are you looking for when you're going through a portfolio or finding someone's Instagram page? What helps an artist stand out for you?
Well, first of all, skill, right? Your artistic skill, artistic talent. Then I'm also looking for, does he or she have a point of view? You know, stylistically, are they doing the same thing? Do they have different styles? You know, where are their strengths? And then being able to see that, you know, does that style fit with what you're looking for, or do they have skills that's on their resume that can translate to what you're looking for?
That takes a talented person to convey all of that, and the talent shines through, no doubt. Where do you see animation storytelling in the next 5 years?
I hope that we've been pigeonholed, I think, in America, that animation tends to be 4-quadrant comedy movies. So I hope that we're telling that there's opportunities for different genres, you know, like what Shane did on 9. I'd love to be able to see more stories like that.
Yeah.
You know, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, you know. I want to see anime becoming mainstream and not fringe. And then stories from all around the world that can bring people together, where people can understand about the different cultures, but we connect emotionally because it's human stories.
That's 5 years ahead I can't wait for, because based on your previous 5 years and then some, you've moved it forward in so many great, brilliant ways. I'm looking forward to seeing where you move the needle. You know?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have worked with really, really talented filmmakers. So,
well,
I wouldn't be here without Mark Osborne, Sergio Pablo, Shane Actor, you know, understand. I mean, I'm very fortunate. You know, I'm so grateful to the wonderful filmmakers I've been able to work with and collaborate with.
Well, it speaks volumes that they're working with you. So we are grateful for your time. We're grateful for your talents, your trailblazing experiences. And as I said, I'm looking forward to seeing where you're going to be taking animation for us in the next 5 years and beyond. Can't wait for the new project. Can you talk a little more about that at all? Or
So Mark Osborne and I are back together at Netflix, and we have a film entitled Escape from Hat.
oh, excited about that.
About all I can tell you right now at this point.
And when are you slated for release on that?
We don't have a release date, which is a great thing about Netflix, right?
When the story is ready, it
Yes.
will be available. That's awesome. Looking forward to that. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Mindy, and thank you, Tina and CTN and Matt, all of you guys and the audience for listening to me.
Well, we are grateful for your time and your experiences and your insights. And again, we'll be watching and definitely want you back for other events and panels and topics of discussion, because you are a wealth of incredible talent and amazing stories. So we're honored to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today, and stay tuned for more primary sources. Jinko, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.